Hello everyone. In this video I will discuss one of the film called The Last Days on Mars, 2013. And never forget that I always pray for you and your family to be happy and healthy always. The movie begins with two explorer crews being shown riding a rover. They are currently on planet Mars and are on their way to pick up their colleague Kim, who is in Sector 9. The place is an excavation site where they are doing research. These two people are named Vincent and Rebecca. On the way they were greeted by a giant sandstorm, but there was no need to worry because it was common on Mars. The sandstorm also hit their base, which brought their power down several times. Today is their last day of research on planet Mars. In the next 19 hours, they will be picked up by a landing craft that is now orbiting planet Mars. 4 people were at the base, namely Harrington, Irwin, Dalby, and Burnell as commander. They asked Vincent to go home immediately because they had to do a briefing before returning to Earth. Meanwhile, another person named Marco didn't care if they went home early or not, because Marco was busy working on his research. Marco then asked the commander for permission if he wanted to go to Sector 9, and the sensors there were not responding, so someone had to fix them. At first, the commander did not allow it, but because Marco insisted, he was finally allowed and asked Harrington to accompany him. When they were about to leave, Vincent, Kim and Rebecca got to the base. Kim then asked why the commander let them go when they were going to do a briefing. Kim felt that Marco had hidden something from them. If it was not important, he shouldn't have gone out. Then she messed with Marco's computer to find out what he was actually working on. Dalby had forbidden it, and she thought Kim was violating Marco's privacy. Kim didn't care. And then on his computer she saw that Marco had found fossil evidence of unusual bacterial life. In other words, Marco had found signs of life on Mars. Commander Burnell felt that what Marco was doing could endanger the crew and ordered them to return immediately. The commander contacted them. Then Harrington said that Marco was currently still at the excavation site and soon he would return. But suddenly a sinkhole occurred where Marco was standing and made Marco fall down. The incident made Harrington panic, so he called for help. Not long after Burnell and Dalby arrived there, Harrington said he couldn't do much because it seemed Marco had disappeared on Mars. Dalby was annoyed that Harrington didn't go down to save him. Harrington was not sure if Marco survived, and he might have died. Burnell also saw that the hole seemed to be so deep that they needed special equipment to go down. Inevitably, they had to go back to base to ask for other help. Dalby had been quite close to Marco, and she wanted to wait there in case something happened. After getting to the base, Burnell informed the others that Marco fell into the hole and the chances of surviving were very small. It was impossible for him to fall without damaging his protective suit, which meant he could die at any time. Burnell then informed the Mission Control Center that they had lost Marco and that the incident would be immediately conveyed to the family. The crew was asked to remove the body as soon as possible because in the next few hours, the landing plane would come to pick them up. Meanwhile, in Sector 9 it was getting dark, and the commander contacted Dalby to report the current situation. Dalby said she couldn't see anything, and suddenly she heard footsteps approaching the rover. Someone opened the rover door and scared Dalby. Long story short, 4 people returned to Sector 9 to look for Marco's body, but they didn't see Dalby there. The commander also asked Irwin and Rebecca to split up to look for her, while Vincent would go down using the equipment he brought. The hole seemed very deep, and Vincent saw no sign of Marco there. Then in the hole, Vincent saw a strange object similar to a web attached to the wall. The object looked alive and moving. Because Vincent had difficulty finding Marco's body, he returned to the top. Then Irwin and Rebecca reported that they couldn't find Dalby anywhere, but they saw 2 pairs of footprints walking towards their base. Burnell suspects Dalby had previously managed to pull Marco up, but it's strange why they didn't go home in the rover. Meanwhile, at Base Camp Kim and Harrington, they saw 2 people approaching. They were sure that the 2 people were Marco and Dalby because the other commanders were currently still in Sector 9. Then, on the CCTV screen, Kim saw Marco outside, heading for the entrance. Harrington then opened the door, and after Marco got inside, Harrington helped take off his astronaut suit. Then he was surprised to see Marco had turned into a zombie. It seemed Marco had been infected with bacteria in the hole. Marco acted strangely and aggressively, took a nearby drill, and stabbed Harrington. Harrington immediately pressed the emergency button and asked Kim to hide. Marco was not alone. Delby was also equally infected and then chased Kim. After a while, the commander and others arrived at the headquarters. They heard an emergency signal, then Burnell went inside to find out what happened. Burnell went to Kim, who was near the door of the lab room, and Kim pointed out that the zombie-like figure in the room was Delby. The commander then asked Kim to immediately wear her protective suit while he held the door. Well, as soon as Kim finished using her protective suit, Marco came to Burnell and there was nothing Kim could do, so she went off base. Then she told her colleagues that Marco and Delby had been infected with something. They were dead but could still move. Meanwhile inside, Burnell fought the zombie Marco with all his might, and finally Burnell managed to get out but was injured. After that, Kim hurriedly broke the seal of the door so that the two of them could not get out. Then they immediately took the commander to second base for treatment. The wound he suffered looked very severe, but strangely there was not much blood. They began to think that the commander had been infected with the same bacteria, and sure enough, when Irwin approached, Burnell lost control and strangled him. As a precaution, they tied up the commander in case he turned into a zombie. Then they heard the alarm go off that the air cabin had been destroyed and Marco had made it out of the main base. Now all they had to do was contact the Aurora in Mars orbit to come and get them. Vincent said that he would go to the main base through the connecting channel below so that he could infiltrate without being seen. They had to hurry because Marco started banging on the door of the second base, and besides that, Burnell started showing symptoms of infection. After Vincent managed to enter the connecting channel, Rebecca examines Burnell's blood sample and sees that there are a lot of active microorganisms in it. So that the bacteria does not spread, Rebecca will inject antibiotics into his body. Meanwhile, Vincent has now reached the communication room. He immediately contacted Aurora to request emergency assistance, but suddenly there was a power outage. The two zombies realized that Vincent was at the main base, and Kim tried to attract his attention to come to the second base. Kim deliberately lets the zombies in and locks them in the air cabin. It turns out that only Delby goes inside, while they don't see Marco outside. Vincent plans to return to the underground ducts, but instead runs into Harrington, who has also been infected. Despite being hit repeatedly, the zombie remains stubborn. There is no other way for Vincent to escape and go into the underground ducts to return to Base 2, but Harrington manages to catch up with him and break through inside. There is panic in the room in various ways. Kim and Irwin tried to distract Harrington by herding him into the lab room. Meanwhile, Vincent tried to open the jammed cabin door, and then, in the lab room, Irwin saw an opportunity to escape. When Harrington attacked Kim, Irwin came out to close the door and left Kim and Harrington locked inside. Without guilt, Irwin said that Kim didn't make it. Now only Vincent, Irwin, and Rebecca are left. After making it out of the base, they immediately got on the rover and then set off for the pickup point. As a result of the previous chaos, Rebecca had a wound on her leg. Vincent then gave her a shot of antibiotics to slow down the infection. Unfortunately, the rover they were driving had very little battery, and it was estimated that they would not reach the pickup point. There was no other way but to return to the base to get a spare battery, but Irwin refused. He thought it was better to run to the pickup point. Besides that, there was a possibility that Rebecca was infected with the same bacteria. Rebecca then said that since the commander previously attacked Irwin, there is a possibility that he is also infected. Then Irwin had an idea. What if they went to Sector 9? The remaining batteries were still enough to get there, and in Sector 9 there was still Marco's rover that was left earlier. That way, they could go to the pickup location without having to get out of the rover. After arriving at Sector 9, Irwin went out to take the rover that was there. Then he contacted Vincent. Irwin said he should go alone without bringing Rebecca. He was very sure that Rebecca was infected, and that if Vincent took her, it could endanger their safety. Vincent was annoyed by Irwin's actions and ran after him. Irwin saw his arrival and then took the rover away. Well, unfortunately, the zombies followed in their footsteps, whether Vincent wanted to get back into the rover and then go away. Fortunately, in front of them, there was a big storm that temporarily eliminated the trail of zombie pursuit. A few hours later, morning approaches, and the sun begins to shine. According to the schedule, Aurora sends down the rescue team to pick them up using the plane. Meanwhile, Vincent, who is in the wheelhouse, does not realize that Rebecca has quietly left the rover. Vincent caught up with her, but Rebecca asked him not to come to her. Rebecca realized that she was infected, then deliberately opened her helmet to sacrifice herself. But even though Rebecca had opened her helmet, she was still conscious and asked Vincent to kill her immediately, otherwise she would soon turn into a zombie. Then, from a distance, Vincent saw that the landing plane had arrived. Vincent also tried to contact the pilot so as not to open the door, but they did not hear his communication calls. Vincent was worried that the infected zombies were attacking them, and sure enough, from a distance, Vincent saw 3 zombies approaching the plane. He also saw Irwin's rover heading towards the plane. After the rescue team came out, they were immediately attacked by the zombies, but it seemed that Irwin managed to hit them all. There was nothing Vincent could do. The rescue team was dead. He also saw the bodies of the zombies starting to blister. Then Vincent immediately got into the plane, and inside he saw Irwin, who was starting to turn into a zombie, trying to fly the plane. Irwin still hasn't changed completely because he still has consciousness and says he just wants to go home. Vincent tries to prevent it, but Irwin attacks him. After knocking Vincent down, Irwin is desperate to fly the plane into the sky. Vincent woke up and tried to stop him. There was a fierce fight between the two of them, and Vincent opened the hatch so that Irwin was sucked out. Once the situation was under control, Vincent injected antibiotics into his body in case he became infected by Irwin's attack. Vincent then reported to the lower mission control center that he was currently in Mars orbit, but the landing craft's fuel was not enough to fly to the Aurora spaceship. None of the crew survived after being infected with the mysterious bacteria. In addition, the rescue team was also killed by their attack. He is the only remaining crew member, but there is a possibility that he was also infected by Irwin's attack. Vincent said that he had the option to drop into orbit so that no one would contract the bacteria that infected him. At least his death would be short-lived, but he would still wait for the control center to answer his report about whether they would save him or not. And finally, the movie was over. The conclusion of this movie is that initially the mission went smoothly because Marco was so obsessed with finding life forms on Mars that everything turned into a disaster. Finding life forms on Mars is indeed one of their goals. If Marco was not ambitious to be the first and chose to discuss it with the team, then they would still be alive and could return to Earth. And that's it for the story series of this film. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribe, like and share. See you in the next video. Goodbye.